Shona, thank you so much for coming on to the Progress Pure pod.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm glad we're finally doing this.
Yeah, me too. No, it's my absolute pleasure to be able to have you on. As I was talking to you a little bit about before, so maybe actually before I go into that, it's helpful to say, Shona Vertue, you're an author, speaker, yoga teacher, PT, apparently you used to be an ex-elite gymnast, which is so cool.
Yes.
Was that kind of like the life career? Like that was kind of, you were going to do that full time?
I mean, I was doing it full time. I was doing over 20 hours a week.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, it's hard to say because I feel like so much has happened, obviously, between now and then. Then I thought I wanted to be a dancer and I thought I wanted to get into performing arts. And then actually, it was through that I then found yoga and then fitness. And so it's been a journey that even though, I didn't become, a gymnast, it all contributed to where I am today in a really important way. So yeah, I guess it was part of the plan, but also I couldn't have predicted it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, a lot of people say that even though at the time you're not really sure where something is taking you, when you kind of get to a point and then you look back on it, like potentially you with fitness, you realize like, oh, that was a piece of the puzzle.
Totally. And a really important piece of the puzzle, but at the time you don't know that that's what it's doing. And I think so. Yeah, you're right. So much of life is like that.
Yeah. And so now, you have like over 400,000 followers on Instagram, over 100K on YouTube. You're the author of the Virtue Method. Is that right? Yeah.
That's right.
And so I actually came across you because I was listening to Caggie Dunlop's podcast, Saturn Returns. And you guys had this amazing episode on relationships and sex, but like kind of like self-exploration with sex. And you guys were talking about some really interesting things that you had learned kind of through self-discovery and personal growth in terms of relationship, even kind of with yourself or with other people. And so when I heard it, I was like, okay, I need to talk to this woman. She sounds amazing. You were so honest. And so that's why I really wanted to get you on the pod.
Well, thank you for having me. It's so funny. Yeah, I think Caggie had put some truth serum in my tea because I sort of came over and we sat on the couch and she lured me into a very deep sense of relaxation that I could just kind of divulge everything. And it's quite funny. Those always make the best podcasts. They make the best conversations when we can just be authentically ourselves and just open up. But it's always funny because it always represents a moment in time. Whenever you listen to anyone's podcasts, or a guest on a podcast or a podcast, it's like it exists. Truth only exists within the context of the moment at which it comes out of someone's mouth, and so I think obviously not truth in terms of like scientific facts, but maybe some at times. At one stage we were very much thought the world was flat and that was a scientific fact. So I know there are still people out there that still subscribe to that truth. So, that's the thing is like, anyway, we're going down a rabbit hole on whether, truth really exists. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that she definitely lured me in. It was definitely a very honest conversation. And I'm sure we'll have another one.
Yeah. No, I do think that is a really good point because it's so true that like you could say something at one point, but then the whole point of like life is to grow and learn and to listen and hopefully change your perspective because of what other people have learned. So to say that like I believed in X 3 years ago, so I still believe in X is a really like one-sided kind of like limited point of view.
Totally. Yeah. And sometimes you might still have that truth, but it's just expanded and progressed, as you say. So, yeah.
Yeah. So before we get into more of the kind of stuff which I want to go into,
the juicy stuff,
literally.
These questions, everyone that's listening right now, this is about to get juicy.
Yeah, 100%. But yeah, I was curious, and obviously, if you don't want to say, you're more than welcome to say, I don't want to say, but like, what are you kind of in terms of like relationships and that kind of thing? Is there anything in particular you're looking for? Are you in a relationship? That I think would be really interesting to hear that.
Not to sound cliche, but I would have to say that I'm in a relationship with myself right now and trying to understand a lot about myself because I was a serial monogamist for a very long time, probably from about the age of I think I was 16 when I entered my first relationship, and I'm now 33. So I am single, and of course, like, I enjoy meeting people, but it's not, I'm not sort of actively seeking. I'm sort of more in a state of allowing myself to learn from interactions that I have with, you know, different people that come into my life. But that's not to say that if someone came into my life and I fell in love with him, that I wouldn't be like, oh my God, like, I'm sorry, but I'm in a relationship with myself right now. Can you come back in a few months? Like, I would be like, all right, let's do this. So yeah, it's hard to say. It's funny because I really probably should come to terms with what it is that I really am looking for. But I'm just not looking for anything. That's how I genuinely feel right now. So I'm sort of at a turmoil between, like, are you supposed to like design and then hold the vision and then try to manifest this person to come into your life?
Yeah.
Or are you actually better off just like allowing that person and then witnessing what comes up and what is reflected back to you? And so I'm kind of in the latter stage at the moment, and perhaps that's going to reveal some things about myself that I need to learn that, you know, will be better for me in the long run.
And when you say you're in a relationship with yourself, like I even if it sounds cliche, like I really love it when I hear women say that, because like my mum, she's 50 something. I think she's going to be 55 this year. And my parents got divorced when I was younger. And since then she's had some relationships, but like now she really preaches like, Molly, no one is coming to rescue you. You need to just love yourself, being like, you know, she doesn't necessarily say be in a relationship with yourself, but like you don't need to go out there and constantly look for something. Like if you can be happy internally and like have a great community, then I feel like you get a lot of satisfaction and wholeness from that, and just being yourself without trying to have to chase like someone or find out what they like and think, and they're thinking of you. Did I say the right thing? Like you can just be with yourself, and that's so refreshing.
Yeah, I think that whole, you shouldn't sort of have to feel like that. I mean, those things may come up for you and it's okay if they do, but they're teaching you about yourself. I mean, I think the key thing is like, when you start to realize that you don't need someone, but instead, you know, you would welcome someone, you realize that when there's not a state of needing and you're just whole and comfortable in yourself, you may have a slightly smaller pool to fish from, I have to say.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you know, someone really excellent is going to come into your life because that's all you'll really allow the space for, if that makes sense. Because it's like, you're like, you have to be pretty good to like make this better, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? And it's not in a sort of like defiant, like, no way, like no men or no women or whatever. It's just more like saying, like, I would like to meet someone who is going to contribute something to my life that's going to make it better, not worse, because actually right now it's fucking excellent.
Right.
And so, you know what I mean? So it's, when you can find that state with yourself, with your friends, like friendships, man, they're just so important. So anyway, I think that's something, a really powerful experience for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you've been a serial monogamist, if you've been from relationship to relationship, often you don't know what that feels like. And so it's really, I was, you know, probably not 16 to 33, but definitely 16 to probably like 29.
Right. Okay.
And that's a long portion of my life. And so I'm just in a process now where I'm like, okay, I'm just going to feel myself a little bit, you know?
Yeah. So it kind of sounds like the time that you can spend just focusing on yourself and prioritizing yourself and not spending that energy thinking of other people means that you can kind of, like you said, heal or grow as a person. And then that makes you realize your worth. And so then, like you said, the pool of people that come in, you're way more cautious about it in a good way, like picky about it in a good way.
Totally. Yeah, picky about it in a good way. Exactly. Absolutely. And you just stay whole to yourself. You don't abandon yourself in order to meet someone else's needs. Because that's the thing, is like, that's the most painful part of a relationship ending. And when I say relationship, I don't even mean necessarily like, you know, boyfriend and girlfriend or girlfriend and girlfriend or boyfriend and boyfriend. I mean like a relationship being like, let's say, even if you just kind of went on a couple of dates and then it ended, it's like the painful part of those things is when when you were inauthentic or when you were, like I said, abandoned yourself to meet someone else's needs or what you thought were their needs, and then they still walk away because you are like, whoa, I feel like less than nothing right now.
Yeah, I totally get that.
Right? And so it's like you're picking yourself back up, and that's the part that really hurts because it's like the shame of abandoning yourself. You're like, well, they left and I left.
Yeah.
So I'm really worthless. Yeah. So that's a really important, lesson in the whole process, is learning to just stand up for yourself and be authentically you and not abandon yourself, but still be able to give without, destroying your boundaries around
It's so funny that you say that, you feel really worthless after that. Like if you've dated someone for a period of time and maybe you're trying to please them so much that you end up losing yourself in it. But like, because I totally had that. Like I had this kind of very short relationship from like September to December of last year. And I remember in that, like trying to be so perfect the whole time, like physically perfect, emotionally perfect, all of this stuff. And at the end, it still didn't fucking work out.
Yes.
And even though I felt like, are you joking? Like this is me trying to be
excellent right now.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm like, I am like gold star potential girlfriend. Like, what the fuck? But then after all that, even though I was just kind of sitting there like, I don't understand, at the same time, it was such a like eye-opening, refreshing thing. Because I was like, oh yeah, like I'm never ever going to be good enough for somebody who I'm not supposed to be with. So why would I ever try to be anything that's not just who I am? And that has really helped.
And we have to go, I've been through those relationships myself as well. And I think, the funny thing is like, a lot of people like to associate with the term like empath, like I'm an empath. And so like, but actually there's a lot of codependency within the context, the way we describe empaths. And so I know there are different concepts, I know there are different things, but I think that definitely I can only speak for myself. I had a lot of codependent traits that would cause me to do that, to sort of abandon self. And that codependency, I always joke with my girlfriends, and I have a lot of like also reformed codependent girlfriends as well. And we just joke about how excellent a codependent can be at being the best fucking girlfriend, because they just literally try to meet your needs. That's it. That is it. We just become so good at it. Like whatever that we'll figure it out in the beginning of the first few weeks of dating. We're like, okay, cool, and like this, and then cool, tick, 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 and then next thing you know, we're trying to play that perfect role, and we can hold it down. But I often say like it's a blessing when those relationships break down, even though they are the most painful. Even if they don't last that long, they are so painful, depending on the degree at which you were inauthentic or the degree at which you'd abandon your own needs. And yet there's so much gift in that adversity of growth. So anyone listening that is literally like feeling at the lowest of low right now, really dealing with a breakup, like just know you're not alone in your pain. I know that doesn't always help everyone, but also know that there is a gift in this adversity. It'll reveal itself. You just got to keep working through it and keep allowing it to kind of like peel through the onion, get to the core.
Yeah, and also just feeling it's okay to just feel shit in those situations and just sit in it for a little bit, rather than constantly being like, I need to try to feel better, I need to find someone else, I need to just like sit in that and just be aware that it feels a bit shit, but that's okay.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't have to intellectualize it. Like that's one of my things. Like I'll wrestle with it. I'll grapple with that bad boy. And it's like sometimes you just got to sit there and allow the pain,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So one thing that I'm super interested to talk to you about is when I heard you speaking on Kagi's podcast, you mentioned how you were going through this period of celibacy. And so that meant no masturbation and no sex. And I was curious as to, one, if you're still doing that, how's that going? And essentially, I'm interested to talk about that.
Yeah, so it's funny. The celibacy thing was really, really profound and important for me. And I wouldn't say that I'm celibate the way that I was then now, because I have had sex and I have masturbated, but but I'm doing, because of that period of celibacy, I'm doing it in a much more measured way. And when I say measured, it's not like this formal like thing that I'm kind of like holding. It's just more that I am really cautious with how I use it. And again, cautious isn't necessarily the right word. For someone like myself and the way that I used to use it, particularly sex for me was an avenue through which to tell myself that I was accessing intimacy, but actually I was avoiding it. And so this is a big topic in and of itself, but it's like you can think you're getting really intimate with someone just because you're having quote unquote intimate experiences. And this can often be the problem with labeling sex as this kind of like putting it on this pedestal, when in actual fact, it isn't always going to lead to intimacy or true intimacy. True intimacy now for me is really being seen by someone and feeling comfortable enough in myself and in the context of the relationship to let myself be held by that person if need be. So to be seen and to be held. And that is true intimacy to me. And I could have sex with someone for years and never have that. And that is a little bit of because of my codependence, because I know that I have the ability to pretend like everything's fine or pretend or fake intimacy when I'm not truly being intimate or truly being authentic. And so that's something that I'm working on. But yeah, so the celibacy helped me to become aware of that, to help me to become aware of like the areas in which I was possibly using sex in particular to numb myself from the fact that I was actually avoiding intimacy, if that makes sense. So sorry for anyone that's like, wait, what did she just say?
No,
it's a bit of a head fuck. You have to you're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
But I just know myself a lot now in that case, and in that, within those circumstances that I'm like, okay, this is why I need to take a bit of a break from it.
That is really interesting because it's kind of like, okay, I'm gonna try to not have sex or do those things, but it's not, and even though that makes it sound like it's about the sex, it's actually not about the sex at all. Like, no. I've never heard that, which is this kind of like, I love doing these podcasts when I like learn something or it makes me think about something else. And the idea that intimacy, like being held by someone, like, oh my God, when you said that, I imagined it and it made me feel so uncomfortable. Like,
yeah, exactly. It does, right?
Like, I'm like, oh my God, but I can't, like, what? Like,
yes.
To break down your walls so much that someone can like hold you and you just be okay with that, like, wow, that's made me, I can't even imagine doing that with someone.
Totally. And it's also, again, it's not about this notion of like rescue. I think it's kind of like this, the difference between, you know, the princess and the queen. You know, the queen energy is like very much about being strong, and it's kind of like, well, why wouldn't you want to take care of me? I'm the queen. Whereas a princess is like, I need you.
Yeah.
You know, and so there's a difference, right? So there's a difference between the way at which you might look at being held. And so for me, being held isn't because I'm like, help me.
Yeah.
Even though, by the way, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that as well. If that's, you know, we're all on our own paths. But I just know that I don't resonate with that. But I do resonate with being taken care of. It just takes a lot. Like, I still get uncomfortable with the notion of. I still get uncomfortable at the thought of like even someone carrying my fucking grocery bags for, you know. So it's just like, okay, gotta let those walls down. Not because of a like desperation, but just because it's like we live in an interdependent universe, and that interdependency is beautiful. It's really beautiful. You know, I love that, like when I see my friends, it's like we have a sharing relationship. You know, my friend will do something for me, I'll do something for her. You know, when we go to get a massage, for example, it's like someone is offering something, we take that, we give them something else. Now, because money is involved, we kind of I guess disillusioned us to thinking that, oh, it's just all about money, but it's not. It is about interdependency. It's about the fact that that's the nature of the universe. We give and we take. And so I think we have to acknowledge that rather than striving for this like defiant independence where we all just have walls up and we're like, I don't need you, I don't need anyone. It's like, no, we can have this interplay, and that's beautiful. You know,
oh my God,
healthy interdependence.
Yeah, Shona, that is really beautiful, because I feel like I feel like recently, like me and my best friend, we've been going on Hinge dates. Like we're 24, we're saying, oh, but this is a red flag, this is a deal breaker, blah blah blah. And then sometimes when you just think about it, and you're just like you just said, like we are interdependent beings, we're humans, we're on this planet because we're supposed to help each other and be a community and live life, and it's so true, and it just puts into perspective how stupid all this stuff is. It's like I mean, maybe people find these things important, but like, don't have sex on the first date, he should pay this, you should do that. You're just kind of like, oh wow, those things actually, that's just not important.
No, I don't think so. I think it depends on the context again of the person. Like, again, for someone like me who has in the past and has a habit of using sex as a means to avoid intimacy, it can be problematic for someone like me to have sex on the first date, because what I will do is I will then be like, oh, well, we had a great sexual connection. We had a great, and then I think we'll have great sex for weeks and weeks and weeks, because there might be some great sexual chemistry there, and I can disillusion myself and go, oh, well, that means we're meant to be together. And so I spend lots of time very cleverly ignoring quote unquote red flags, which sometimes you have to be careful not to kind of like over label people, but also, or over label behaviors, be too cautious. Because I think sometimes we can be too quick to kind of go, oh, red flag, or like, oh, he took 6 hours to reply, red flag, like whatever it might be. Right. And it's like, let's chill. But I think that I think that there's I think there's something to be said for it depends on the context. If it's your rule because you're suddenly like, oh, well, I'm not a lady. If I, it's like, well, what is hang on, what?
Yeah.
What is a lady?
I would love to talk to you about this, because recently, and so without like going into too much, so whatever, fuck it, I'm going to say it. So basically,
just say it.
Yeah. So my dad recently, and my dad listens to all these, so hey dad. But so I recently released this dating episode, Red Flags and Deal Breakers, and I talk about guys and, dating and all this stuff. And he kind of brought it up to me like, Mole, you shouldn't really talk about these things, because guys that are going to listen, like that some of them, guys might, enjoy listening to those kinds of things, but like they're not going to want to marry you, is essentially what he was saying. I swear to God. And I was just sitting there like, Dad, this isn't the 17th century. But that made me, this is one of the things I sent to you of wanting to talk about, was that whole Madonna whore complex. Yes, where guys will, and I think this was coined by Sigmund Freud, who spoke about that guys will either see women as the slutty whore prostitute, who they will forever desire and lust over, who they will never marry and respect, or the saintly Madonna, who they want a wife and who can't have kind of like sexual, she can't be sexual or any of those kinds of things, and they will never want or lust over her, but they will marry her. And this also ties into what we were talking about of sex on the first date, and whether you're doing that for your own reasons or whether you're like, I want to be a lady, like you mentioned. And so I would really love to get your opinion on, and maybe it has nothing to do with the Madonna whore complex. I think I'm just excited to talk about all this stuff, but I would love to get your opinion on sex on the first date, and why for you, like you kind of just said, how that's probably a problematic thing.
Yeah, so I can only speak for myself, and I can only say that for me it's problematic because I know that I have that habit when it comes to sort of misreading. So I may have a great sexual chemistry or connection with someone, but they're not actually great for me in other ways, and so I'll sometimes ignore other things. I'll sometimes ignore other aspects and other characteristics because the sex is good, because I'm like, well, but we're really intimate. And so we're really, so I have to be cautious of that stuff. When it comes to, sex on the first, it's really funny, because for a long time I was very much like, no, I want to know if we have good sexual chemistry. Mm-hmm. So I'm in there. The other thing that I think is interesting to consider is that there's a pretty heavy energy exchange that occurs when you spend time with someone. Like, have you ever just sat in a room with someone that's really heavy or negative, and you kind of leave that catch up feeling like, oh, fuck, I feel really heavy, It's that sort of feeling. Think about when you have sex with someone that you don't really know, right, on a first date. Like, what kind of energy exchange is going on there? And so, you potentially, and if you're quite sensitive to that, stuff, and we don't have to get into the ins and outs of it, because I know for some scientists out there, they're gonna be like, what the fuck is she talking about? Other people are gonna be like, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I just know that after I've had something like that, there's definitely energies that I'm carrying that I'm like, okay, this doesn't feel like my stuff. I just feel like, ooh, because I haven't really gotten to know that person very well before allowing them in that space. Now, whether you want to talk about energy or not, even just allowing someone into your personal space in that way without really knowing them, sometimes that can feel uncomfortable. But again, perception is reality. Perception is reality. And so we can choose to attach a meaning to that is really immersed in that more old school, not very feminist mentality of like, lady this, nothing about female pleasure. It's all just about like how a lady should behave and according to the context of men's expectations. Or we can look at it through the lens of female pleasure and just two people interacting and sharing a moment together and how wonderful. And so there's that, and it really depends on how you choose to perceive it. And I think that's one of the most liberating things. I mean, it's not nihilistic, but I guess it's a little bit existentialist, is that the freedom lies in the fact that it's meaningless. The freedom lies in the fact that you can choose to attach a meaning to it or not. And that is going to be really dependent upon the influences of your parents, the influences of your peers, the influences of society at the time. It really depends.
So are you saying that actually you think that sex, or maybe not even necessarily on the first date, but sex in general can be quite liberating, because as the woman or as the man, I guess whoever you are listening, or whoever you are listening to this, the power and the freedom within that can come from what you decide to
attach to that. What meaning?
Yeah,
I do think that. What I will say is that you have to be very careful that you have that it's not another, again, and I'm just talking from my own experience, is that I'm very, my ego's very good at convincing me that, that it's the right thing to do, because you should just live in the moment, or whatever sort of like liberating experience my ego's decided that this will lead to. And, in the end, it still gets me into some trouble. It just depends on intention. Like if you're wanting to have a relationship with someone, and you think you like them enough, let's say you've been on a couple of dates with them, and you're kind of like, wow, like there's a real chemistry there. Like, why not just fucking wait? Like, what is the hurry though? Honestly, like, what is the hurry? And this is, I know I sound really conservative, but it's not about conservatism. It's not about you are a whore. And there's nothing wrong with being a sex worker as well. I will just say that. But it's like, there's nothing bad about having sex with someone on the first date. But if you do like this person, what are you rushing into? Like, there's something so beautiful and juicy. I don't know why this word keeps coming to mind. But there's something so beautiful and juicy about the anticipation of whether it will or it won't happen. So, like, why don't we live in that for a little bit longer? Kind of like, I think about that feeling of like, when you have like a drink and you have that first glass, and you're like, oh, I'm vibing tonight. You know what I mean? Like, you have that first Aperol spritz, and you're like, fuck yeah, it's summer, and I'm feeling good. And you have the second one, and you're still feeling pretty good. But then you have like the third, fourth, or the fifth, or whatever. Yeah. And you kind of like, then you're done, right? Or you're kind of out, and you're just drunk. But that tipsy feeling, oh, so good. Like, why don't we live in the tipsy? And so I think that, like, when there's chemistry and there's sexual chemistry between two people, or there's charisma between two people, why not just allow that for a few more dates? And then kind of go, okay, do you know what? Let it brew, let it build. And then by then you kind of know a little bit more about that person, and you can kind of decide. Because maybe it is just the first day you had good chemistry, and then the next day you're like, oh, fuck, actually. Or next date. So there's just no harm in waiting. There just isn't any harm in waiting. If it's meant to be, it will happen.
Yeah, I agree. And it's super interesting, because thinking about it from the perspective that you just mentioned of, if the goal to not have sex on the first date is to allow it for you to have time to try and clearly see, regardless of whether you have great sex or not, to clearly see whether you guys vibe or understand each other or have that level of intimacy, which you said before is if someone really sees you and if someone really gets you, then sex kind of just clouds that, which I've never thought about before.
Yes, it can really cloud stuff really easily. And so that's why, and so it's funny because I'm so glad we're having this conversation, because so much about what I see in the media now, because essentially what I'm saying is not very sexy according to the current trends. Like,
right.
It sounds like what I'm saying is, like, don't have sex on the first date and hold it back and all this stuff. I am saying that to a degree, but I'm not saying it for the same reasons that were said in the past. I'm not saying it because I think that there's anything bad about you if you do. It's just more a question of saying, like, just sit with it for a second, because there's no hurry, but also there's a lot that you can discover about someone outside of the context of sex if you just allow yourself to spend time with each other and get to know each other. And I actually think it makes for better sex. I honestly do, because it's like the anticipation and the connection that you have is just so much deeper. It's a beautiful thing. So I just think it's beautiful. And I think that when it's just kind of like fucking on the first night, I don't know. I just it's not as but each to their own. Like, if that's the intent, if you're going out with someone literally for that intent, then that is 100% okay. But if you're going on a first date with someone and you have the intention to meet someone that you would like to be with, then I would give it a little bit more time.
Isn't that so funny? It's like such a contradictory kind of like oxymoron thing, and like, guys, I bet if they're listening to this, are probably like, for fuck's sake, like, if you're a girl and you like a guy, don't have sex with them. If you're a girl and you just want to fuck and you don't really like the guy, go and have sex with them.
I know, it's very confusing for men. I guess I suppose it's really confusing. But yes, I think it's again, and it's all situational too, because sometimes, sometimes the time is right, and you just, there are plenty of people out there that were like, they had sex very quickly on. But I have to say that none of the long-term relationships I've been in ever happened because of early sex. Like, all my long-term relationships came from waiting, and not waiting because I was trying to hold it back or to, tease him or lure him in or anything like that. It was just, we got to know each other, because some of it was like friendship that then led into more, and then we got to know each other on intimate levels in terms of conversations and sharing things about our history and our past, and that just kind of like helped to create this kind of, it's almost like a yogurt. I don't know why I thought yogurt, or like a sort of kombucha of like kombucha. Kind of, it's like fermenting in a really tasty way, and then then
that's such a Australian like fitness person, like, it's this kombucha.
For fuck's sake, I know, I should have thought of something else. I should have said like beer. That's fermenting as well.
That's totally fair, and I think it's important because it actually it's something that elevates above the whole stupid Madonna whore complex. Like, it's not to do with that. It's not to do with trying to be this angel and like for the male gaze. It's just like, it's actually for yourself, and just making that conscious decision of, I want that energy inside me.
Totally,
like,
exactly.
Me.
In and around.
No,
Exactly.
That is super interesting. And do you think that this is something, when you were being celibate, do you think that you've had those relationships, those meaningful relationships since then, because being celibate allowed you to realize, I want to wait? Or was that just coincidental, and then the celibacy thing added to that?
I think the celibacy thing just helped me to develop more self-awareness. But actually the waiting thing was something that I'd actually learnt to kind of, well, I don't want to say to confront, but it was very confronting. I was actually in a therapy session. I was coming off the back of a very short, relatively short, like it was only like 4 or 5 months long. But it was painful. I'd really allowed myself to be just the way that the only way I feel like I can give you an idea of it is like, I felt like I'd plugged this man into my life force, and like he was just he was draining it from me. And it was my fault because I'd plugged myself in, if that makes sense. It wasn't that he was like this horrible person that was like draining. It was like I had willingly allowed myself to really just give all of myself to him and to the relationship, to the point where I just felt completely like a shell of a woman when I came out of it. And so I ended up going to therapy and doing psychotherapy, doing psychology sessions with an incredible psychologist, and I love her to bits, and we did some incredible work on the subconscious. And basically she was like, I want you to sit, when you meet someone that you think you like, I want you to wait 6 weeks before you sleep with him. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? I was like, wait, and in my head, I'm like, she didn't say that right. She meant 6 days. But even that, I was like, 6 days? 6 dates, 6 days? I was like, no, fuck that. 6 minutes. Okay. So like, I really was like, how will I do that? And so it actually was really, confronting. And I failed many times. Like I met guys and I would try my hardest. And when I say I met guys, like I actually, since that date, it's not like I've met loads and loads of guys. And for the record, every person that I slept with, I entered into a relationship with, for a long period of time. But after this one relationship that just sort of like, I say messed me up, but it just kind of broke me open and helped me to find myself. So it's okay. But, I found myself being really confronted with this notion of like, wow, I want to have sex with them very quickly. And it's like, why? Yeah. What is that eagerness? And that it was that eagerness. Sometimes you can find it. It's like people that maybe have an eagerness to drink or an eagerness to take drugs or an eagerness to online shop. It's like, well, what is the eagerness there? This like uncomfortable like need to do something. What is it teaching you? Like, what if you were to actually refrain from the eagerness and sit in the discomfort that is arising from you not doing that thing? What can you discover about yourself in that discomfort? And so that was what led to the celibacy, because I'd started doing this whole thing of like not having sex with people that I'd met. And then I was like, oh, wow, this is teaching me a lot. So I was like, do you know what? I'm just going to sit with this for a bit. And I'm not going to masturbate either. I'm not going to like numb any pain or distract myself or procrastinate using sexual pleasure. I'm actually just going to sit and see what I'm trying to avoid right now in this moment.
That's really interesting. There are two things that I kind of want to ask you about on there. The masturbation one is the one after, but the first kind of thing that sprung to mind, and maybe this is like a question that is a product of the society we live in, but I'm just trying to imagine being in that situation that you were and going on dates with guys and liking them, wanting to have sex with them, feeling uncomfortable because you were like, I'm trying not to. Did you have to explain that to guys? Like, did it ever come up in conversation? Were they ever like, well, why not? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's funny because it's a really hard conversation to have. Yeah. I find it hard to have that because it's sort of like, the tension's building. And also if you have any codependent tendencies, you may have a fear, and this may resonate with people listening, is that you may have a fear that when you express a need, that you will be abandoned. That if you express any kind of need to anyone, that they will walk away from you because you have a need. And so you become very good at not having needs. But you don't become good at not having needs. You just become good at masking them or muting them or suppressing them. And they manifest in other areas of your life. Sometimes they re-manifest as, like perfectionism or exercise addiction or, eating disorders or various different, they can come out in other ways, right? And so, for me, I found that I became just very, very good at not expressing a need that I had. And so when I would meet with these men, it was sort of like, oh, I want to sit with you and say like, hey, the reason that I don't, like, I know this, I really want to have sex with you, but I can't right now because I've got this thing that I'm trying to do. And, so I found it really hard to find the words. But one way in which it was reframed to me was like, well, anyone that sees your worth for you will have no problems at all in sitting through this, because they want to get to know you. And so it actually becomes a really good filter for filtering out the douchebags, basically. Because anyone that's really worthy of actually having sex with you wants to get to know the real you behind the sex, outside of the context of the sex. So that's why it's important at times to hold back, because it's like, well, do you want me, or do you just want to have good sex? Or do you, and when I say good, that's, sorry, I shouldn't have said good sex, but do you just want to have sex? Are you also just trying to numb yourself from intimacy? So yeah, it's a filter, to be honest.
That's so, I literally got goosebumps when you said that, because it's such a, I've had relationships, or I don't know, situationships before, where you're in them and there's something not quite right, and I felt like I don't feel like he gets me, or like I don't feel like he sees me, or he understands me. And that, what you said, would have been such a great way to test if that was true, or to see. Yeah,
exactly. And again, it's, for the record, this is not a carrot dangling thing of like, hey, if you want it, come get it, like this coy kind of, it's not that. It's just kind of going, hey, look, I'm not about that right now. I will be. I feel really sexually attracted to you. And you have to find the words that work for you, because like obviously sometimes it's a bit formal if you're like, obviously I would like to, connect my penis with your vagina, or like have sexual intercourse, but obviously you're not going to speak like that, but it's like, I think that anyone that is truly worthy of you will sit through that and get to know you and want to know you. And again, it depends on what you're looking for. If you are literally just looking for casual sex, then we're not even really talking to you, are we really?
No, exactly.
in this context.
Exactly. And the masturbation thing, that's also really interesting, because that doesn't have to do with necessarily anybody else. You can do that on your own, thank God. But so how come that you saw that as a part of the celibacy thing?
Because of the ways in which I would use it. So for me, masturbation became a tool for distraction and procrastination. And so it became somewhat problematic. Because again, it was another opportunity to numb myself, and I'm old school, social media doesn't do it for me, and I'm like, I didn't grow up with social media, but masturbation, I didn't grow up with, I guess, so it was like, it's not the same thing. Online shopping doesn't do it for me. These things that we have set up in society to help distract us from understanding our true selves, for me, none of them were really working, but, masturbation did work well. And so I was like, oh, do you know what? I'm going to see what happens when I don't follow that urge, and see what is hidden in the discomfort. And I just wanted to see what would come up for me. It was interesting, because what I found was a pattern, that every time I had an urge to masturbate was actually more so when I was avoiding doing something that would contribute to taking care of myself. And this is a really interesting notion, is like, we get sold so often that self-care and self-love is like, fucking running a bubble bath and lighting some candles and like buying a crystal or something. But truly, like, self-care is like opening your mail on time, paying, any fines you might have on time, or paying bills on time, or, responding to, an email about a podcast, whatever it might be. It's like, these are things that really relate to true self-care and self-love. And so I don't always think that masturbation is about self-care. And I know that it's sometimes sold like that. And for many people, it can be an act of that, but you have to decide for yourself. And for me, I had really come to realize that the times that I was really craving masturbation were the times that I was actually trying to avoid truly maturely taking care of myself. And so, that's why I decided to sort of self-regulate a little bit.
Okay, that's interesting. So it's potentially, they're kind of potentially two separate things. The not trying to have sex with somebody when you first kind of meet them until you're aware if you've developed like a meaningful connection with them that's worthwhile. That's more to do with the codependency thing. And then trying not to masturbate, that's to do with self-love and trying to prioritize, trying to not, I guess, abuse it in a way to distract yourself.
Totally.
Yeah.
This is why, you know, on social media, like, black and white statements are really problematic. So we see these black and white statements that are like, you know, masturbate whenever the fuck you want, you know, you're a strong woman. And it's like, well, yes, but that's not going to apply to everyone, you know. And actually I find more strength not in not masturbating, but I find more strength in just sitting with myself for a bit and deciding on whether it is that I want to access female pleasure, you know, or my own experience of pleasure, or do I want to access distraction? You know, so I think there's nothing wrong with taking pause. Again, same thing as with the dating. It's like, what's the fucking hurry? Like, just sit with yourself for a sec and go, okay, should I just breathe for a second? Have I done the things that really, like, you know, what am I avoiding here? If I'm avoiding anything, no, okay, cool. Or am I about to just go to bed and it'd just be so nice to, like, have an orgasm and fall asleep?
Yeah.
By all means,
Yeah.
that's great. Go
Amen.
do that. You know what I mean? Like, exactly.
Yeah.
Best way to fall asleep.
Yeah. And did you, because like you talking about black and white statements on Instagram, it's so true. Like, I just see them kind of like slapdash everywhere, and people are like, yeah, you know, have sex with who you want and all this stuff, and like sex toys and everything. And I'm like, so when did we go from 0 to 100? Like, when I was at school, no one spoke about masturbating, orgasms. All my guy friends spoke about it, and they'd speak about it around girls, and I would feel unbearably uncomfortable because I was like, if somebody asks me, I don't know what the right answer is. And now suddenly I feel like that everyone is associating this whole female sexual liberation with being super sexual, which is fine, like we said, if that is up your street. But I felt like growing up, I really had to kind of seek and start to construct and read in ways on how to speak about female pleasure and orgasm, or even not necessarily orgasm, but masturbation. So it is quite alarming that there does seem to be this kind of like rush of like, everybody go and like do X, Y, and Z, when I felt like I hadn't come across different levels of that type of conversation.
Yes, 100%. And I think we have to accept that, like, everything in society, like, the pendulum swings. So, you know, we have a similar situation in the sort of fitness world right now, where there's like this huge pendulum swinging away from diet culture, which is excellent. But it's moving so far to the point where it's like anyone that would like to even like monitor their diet in any way, or maybe they just want to eat a salad, you know, they're being shamed for caring about, you know, optimal performance. They're being shamed for caring about how to eat or how to take care of their bodies or their vessels in a way that's optimal for the type of output that they want to have. It's like, oh, you're addicted to exercise and you have an eating disorder because you want to eat a salad and you want to wake up early in the morning and you care about fitness. And it's like, what? Like, what the fuck? Like, what? And so, you know, I just think the pendulum always has to swing in you know, as a revolt. And so I get that, and I'm okay. Like, it is what it is, but it's just important to have voices that are constantly reminding us that there is gray. There are 50 shades of gray.
Yeah, 100%.
You know, it's not just black and white. And so we just have to just keep remembering that. You read a black and white statement, just know that it's also, especially when you read it on Instagram, it's designed to get you to click on it, because that engagement obviously pushes that person or that profile up on the algorithm. And so, like, we just have to take those things into account whenever we read things.
Yeah, 100%. And one thing that I wanted to ask you, just because, like I was saying, I found that it was hard to find conversations or things about talking about orgasms and female sexual pleasure and stuff like that when I was a kid. And I wish I had listened to something or spoken to someone who spoke more about that. Like, the first time I only ever basically I had to find out. I had to literally look up on YouTube, like, how do you orgasm as a girl? Because I had no clue, because girls didn't talk about it. I was like 18 and looked it up on YouTube and was like, oh, this is what it's about.
So funny.
And like
so
that was like one of the best days of my life, because I was like, oh my God, like I get it now. But I was just wondering if was it something that you kind of always knew how to do? Did your friends talk about it? Did you have a moment like that or anything?
Oh God, no! I was a horny little devil from a very young age. Yeah, from a very young age. I don't know whether it was a gymnastics thing, because actually, my gosh, like the little gymnast, like my best gymnast friend. I'm not going to say her name because poor thing, like she'll be like, oh, how could you just give my secret this secret away? We were like probably like 8 years old. We used to like sneak into my poor mum's gonna listen to this too and be like, what? We used to sneak into like her bedroom and like shut the door and then go through her lingerie, try on her lingerie, and then one person would wear, oh my God, my poor mum, I'm so sorry, mum, and put on like these little 8-year-old girls like putting on this like massive lingerie, and then one girl would pretend to be the guy, the other girl would pretend to be the girl. Yeah, and so we'd have this sort of like, obviously we had no fucking clue what we were doing, but we would just have this sort of sexual experience between each other, like sort of exploring. And I don't think that I orgasmed, but I remember it feeling particularly good. And obviously being a gymnast, I was incredibly in touch with my body. And I think that does make a difference in your and this is a total guess, so I don't have any study. I don't even know if that's an ethical study, that you couldn't really do an ethical study on this. But I do think that perhaps, you know, there are certain things that can happen at an earlier age, if you are very in touch with your body. And so, yeah, I think I was like very, very young when I had my first orgasm. Yeah. For sure. Yeah.
No, 100%. That I also had something when I was really young with, like, it was funny. It was with another girl where like we were kind of exploring sexual. We didn't really know it was sexual though, like just kind of like hanging out.
It's like an inner urge.
Exactly, an inner urge. You don't know what you're doing, but like you also kind of know it's wrong. Like you're like, I know this isn't, like, you know, whether it's sneaking into your mum's room or like whatever you're doing.
You sort of like, you just are like, this feels a bit naughty.
Yeah, exactly. But the funny thing is that girls don't talk about it. And I guess that even from when we're born, whether that's a society we live in, and just subliminal messaging or saying inappropriate things when you're little and not knowing, and then your parents be like, shh, you can't say that. It's just something that I feel like bruise. And it's a shame, because then for a lot of women, it can mean that they don't actually explore themselves sexually or discuss these things until a much later period in life, you know, and which is great. They talk about it at some point, but it's just a shame that there has to be so much shame about talking about that stuff.
Totally. And I do think that limits your ability to have an orgasm. I don't think that there's, you know, if you haven't orgasmed, it's not because there's something wrong with you, or that there's, you know, it's like there is so much shame. I remember, you know, in we were still in primary school. It was three girls, so myself included. So myself and then two other girlfriends of mine were like best friends. We had a little like crew, and we had this little book, and we'd like draw, like we were basically just exploring concepts of sex that we'd like overheard or we saw, and we'd write. It was like a little journal between the three of us. We were so young, like we're talking like year 6. So I don't even know how, year 5 and 6. Anyway, so it was this little diary, and it had like cartoons that we'd drawn of like willies, of course. Yeah. But then it also had like things where we're like, oh, and I was watching a sex scene came on, and this happened, and this happened. And we were just fucking exploring something very like natural. It was not, you know, there was nothing sinister about it. And we basically, one of the teachers found it, and we were reprimanded so hard, like to the point where I remember sitting in this room, it was like a trauma piece, like we were bawling our eyes out because we were put into so much trouble. And then they're like, we're going to tell your parents, this is absolutely disgusting, we cannot believe that you guys, and it's like, what? Like, I know that the boys would not have, and I went to a co-ed school, and I know that the boys would not have been treated the same way about that kind of, they would have been like, oh, silly boys, and like, this is terrible. And they would have still reprimanded them for something that I think we shouldn't have such taboos around. But it's just more that it's like our intention for doing it was like exploration. It wasn't that we were ever, I mean, we're not predators.
Yeah.
You know, so, right. So there was nothing illegal about what we were doing. There was nothing sinister. And so, yeah, it's like that stuff stays with you on a subconscious level.
Yeah.
And then again, it makes you put sex on this pedestal in a problem. What I would like to say is a problematic pedestal, not as a pedestal of like, I do think we need to put it as a sort of like, yeah, let's just hold that for a second. Let's know that thing, which is a beautiful thing between two people, or three or four, or however many you want to put in this scenario. But like, let's just know that is what it is, that there are other things to explore, you know. But I think that, yeah, it's just, yeah, and that's old school. Like, gosh, you know, I think the teacher that got really mad at us, she was like 55 or something like this, and this is back in the 90s. So
yeah,
you know, we're talking like very different generation, and I understand that now, but like as a kid you don't understand that sort of stuff.
You don't understand it, and it's so important. I'm so happy that, you know, we get to have this conversation, and hopefully it will inspire people to have these conversations, because so much of the time, especially when you have kids, you have like reactionary responses to things, and you a lot of the time react badly and in a scary way because you don't understand it yourself, and you've never had that conversation. And so
exactly,
even my dad having that conversation with me, being like, listen, no guy's gonna want to do this, or you know, it's shameful for you to talk, and it's just kind of like, it's so important to just ask yourself, why is it shameful? Like, what are the connotations with that? You know, what are we associating with ourselves and with other things when we talk about sex or whatever it is? Or
yes, I agree. So I'm just moving you because my battery's going to die. And I just suddenly started to see it go. I'm like, oh no, it's on 1%. It's going to drop out.
Don't worry. But yeah, I mean, I think it's probably a good time to start wrapping it up there. And Shona, her laptop has just died, so I probably will wrap this up there. But I mean, it's pretty good timing. Hopefully, guys, we can start having these meaningful, important conversations in a way that if you feel ashamed or bad about talking about something, to ask yourself, like, why do I feel that way? And maybe we should start changing that, because I feel like in life, if you do something with a good connotation, or with a good motivation potentially, of that you don't have any bad intentions for anyone, then we're just humans on this planet, exploring, trying to create communities and help each other. So I'm gonna wrap this up. If you guys want to follow Shona, her Instagram is Shona _Vertue VERTUE. You can check her out on there, and you can also check her out on YouTube. Thanks, Shona. Cool. Bye.